Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Mental health, a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. In Nigeria, the burden for mental health disorder is very high, with limited access to available and affordable mental health services in the country. Many cases of mental health problems are being managed by psychiatrists, nurses, social workers, occupational therapists, religious leaders, and traditional care attendants. However, research and information about the level of mental health services in Nigeria are very hard to come by or non-existent, and this has contributed towards the neglect of mental health issues in the country. Joining us now as we take a look at mental health issues generally is Dr. Toju Chike-Obi, an American board-certified pediatrician and the co-founder and medical director of HealthCore Limited. The flagship product, the Health Zone, uses broadcast media, social media, and other internet platforms to promote health and wellness and prevent illness by improving health literacy in sub-Saharan Africa and the diaspora. Good morning, Dr. Chike-Obi, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me here.
Well, in Nigeria, when people hear mental health, it's almost a taboo topic.
Yes.
It's almost, a subject of stigma. To worsen matters, most of our trained psychiatrists, they've gone into politics. Some of them have been appointed special assistants to wives of politicians. So we don't even have enough psychiatrists. So could you take us through the challenge of mental health? And, just for people to have a better understanding that mental health is just another type of illness, and then categories of mental health. Because I see some people, they are always talking on their phones on the street. Sometimes I think, well, could it be a category of mental health crisis? Before you go and talk on your phone, you run into a vehicle or into a ditch. But please enlighten us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me here. And this is a subject that's very dear to my heart. I don't think there's anybody, any family that I know in my circle who doesn't have somebody, some child, some family member with some degree of mental health problems. But mental health matters, and it's important that we're clear on what it is and what it's not. Okay? So our mental health, as you mentioned, affects how we think, how we feel, and how we behave. All right? And so how it helps us in how we handle stress, how we deal with difficult situations. It helps us to reason. It helps us with making choices, the decisions we make, processing the information we get. Figuring out exactly what it means and then determining how that information we've learned or experiences we've had will inform the things we say and the things that we do. So mental health is very, very important. And there are three components of mental health, actually. So it's emotional well-being, social well-being, and psychological well-being. Because sometimes people talk about emotional health and it's really a catchword for mental health, but there's three components to it. Psychological well-being refers to how well you process the information you get and the experiences you're going through in life, okay? And psychological well-being is associated with being able to make rational decisions, being able to, have that decision-making ability for every phase, every aspect of your life. Emotional well-being, on the other, takes that information and those learned experiences and deals with the feelings and emotions that comes from that and how you handle that. Okay? And then social well-being really is how well, as he mentioned, you're integrated into your community. Do you feel like you're a contributing member of the community? Do you feel accepted in your community? So all of those three things, psychological, emotional, and social well-being, together make up good mental health. Okay? And the issue here is that, as he mentioned, having poor mental health is stigmatized not just in a place like Nigeria, but really all over the world. Hushed whispers, or people don't talk about it. In some places, people hide family members who have mental health issues. But if you think about it, I, for example, am an asthmatic. I don't consider myself to be a weak person or inadequate in any way because I have asthma. Just as somebody who has diabetes does not consider themselves inadequate or weak in any way. Yet, for some reason, when it comes to mental health, we believe that people with mental health issues are defective, they're weak, they just can't handle the stresses of life. You know, we make all these assumptions about people with mental health, forgetting that it is just a disorder like any other disorder. And you were going to ask me something.
Yes, I was going to talk about disorders, and thank you for making a distinct separation between what it is and what it isn't in the very first instance. It's not, people just think, oh, if you're mad, it's such a hush-hush thing, but it's actually a disorder, it's a condition.
Yes.
Now, how does it present?
Okay.
What are some of the symptoms? How do you recognize? Because again, people also use the word very carelessly. Oh, I feel depressed. Oh, I have anxiety.
Yes.
Because of certain symptoms. So can you share with us how it presents, the types or forms of mental health disorders, and then some of the symptoms to look out for, especially in its early stages?
Okay. I love that question because 50% of lifetime mental health issues show up before the age of 25. They show up in teens and young adulthood. And then, they kind of continue to manifest and worsen over time if not cared for. So what are the things you look for? Different categories. First, if you are either sleeping too much or not sleeping enough. So all of a sudden your sleep habits change, okay? Or your appetite changes. You suddenly lose appetite. You don't want to eat. You're not particularly hungry. Or you begin to eat voraciously. So there's a change in your sleep patterns, in your eating, all right? So that's one thing. Another thing is a change in your mood. So you suddenly have irrational outbursts. You're suddenly more angry, more labile, more touchy. You're more easily triggered. Things upset you more. Okay? So that's one thing to look for. Or you don't feel like being involved in the things things that used to excite you and interest you, you lose interest in those things. That's a key, especially for young people. So the kid or the adolescent who normally likes, riding their bike or skateboarding or playing video games or something like that, all of a sudden loses interest in those sort of things, all right? Then the other thing is if you start to have thoughts, like persistent thoughts that you can't seem to get rid of. And it's usually thoughts of doom and gloom or thoughts of, paranoid thoughts, like somebody is coming for you, somebody has it in for you, those sort of thoughts. Or you begin to have thoughts of self-harm or thoughts of harming people around you. Okay, so these are some of the things that you can look out for as symptoms of a possible mental health issue. The most common mental health issues are anxiety and depression, okay? And mental health, everybody honestly is at risk for mental health issues because they're situational mental health disorders. So for example, you lose a loved one through sudden death or even expected death, a parent, a child, a very close loved one, okay? You do get depressed. And clinical depression is when you feel sad and you lose interest in things that normally, some of these things that I described, for really up to 3 weeks or longer. That's when you call it a clinical depression. So you think about it, if you lose a loved one, you can become clinically depressed. But those sort of situational mental health disorders are temporary. So all of us are at risk for those sort. Or your economic condition takes a turn for the worse all of a sudden, right? And or a particular relationship, has a major problem in that relationship. So those sort of things can lead to temporary mental health problems, disorders. But these are temporary. Now, if these are not properly managed, then they become more chronic. all right? But all these symptoms that I described, and there are other symptoms too, other more subtle things, but in general, these are the things to look out for that give you a clue that perhaps I'm having. The other thing is you begin to depend on things to boost your mood. So drinking more, if you were not a drinker, all of a sudden you're drinking more because you need some courage, some Irish courage, so to speak.
We use the description.
Or drugs, or using drugs.
One may just say that Nigeria is one large madhouse because all these symptoms, we see them almost on a daily basis. But the challenge of healthcare. Mm-hmm. In 2023, the theme for the World Mental Health Day, October 10 every year, was mental health is a universal right.
Yes.
Now, how can the Nigerian government ensure that mental health care becomes a right? Because we see cases of people who, exhibit certain symptoms. They are kept in some cage somewhere. Because after all, the original law talked about lunacy.
Yes.
So in Nigeria, mental health is still seen as lunacy. So how can, government reach a level whereby people with mental health issues are not treated as lunatics, but as individuals with right? And what should they do? Even beginning with training. We don't have up to 300 practicing psychiatrists in the whole of Nigeria.
Country. Absolutely. Attending
to over 200 million people. What would be your advice to government at all levels?
I think it always begins with learning and understanding. If the people who make up our government do not understand what there has to be training on mental health, what it is, like I said, and what it is not. There has to be an understanding in the fabric of the health system that mental health is another illness just like any other illness. And as such, since we don't corral all our diabetics or all our hypertensive and, put them somewhere, that in the same way, we have to address people with mental health issues similarly. Mental health, like any disorder, has a spectrum from very mild anxiety to severe life-threatening issues. Do you understand? And so if there is no understanding of the range and the spectrum of mental health, it cannot even begin to be addressed properly. There has to be a lot of education. A lot of education in the health community, a lot of education in the public, a lot of education with our elected officials. Because we know what the deal is with the allocation, the budgetary allocation for health, right? It's one of the worst in the world, okay, when compared to the 8%, exactly, all right? The WHO says it needs to be at about 15%. We're at 5%, and we've languished there for decades with different government administrations coming through. So when there's only 5% of your budget allocated to health, guess how much of that 5% goes to mental health? So I think there has to be a focused campaign. And sadly, or, maybe not sadly, but it tends to be advocates, citizen advocates, professional advocates in the medical community who will be the ones to elevate the profile of mental health so that it becomes front and center.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad we're having this conversation because you talked about triggers. Mm-hmm. There's some triggers. There's some that are not, there are chemical imbalances as well. Yeah. Not just, physiological triggers like you mentioned, a loss and things like that. And I say this because in some countries and even in Nigeria, there's some crime and there's some elements of crime that are triggered by mental health conditions. Absolutely. And that's why in some cases they'll do a mental health evaluation for certain crimes. Mm-hmm. And that's why in terms of, you talked about how you can self-identify, but how can people around you, so family members, because it's often something one doesn't want to admit. You just think, it's just a phase, I'll get through it. How do you identify it? And then number two, at what point should you seek help?
Okay.
And what are the ways to measure? Because, I mean, like sometimes it's a physical evaluation, but there's sometimes it's deeper, whereby you need to go into hospital, you need to get tested,
Yes.
and then you need to get treated.
Yes, yes. Okay, let's first talk about what causes mental health issues, okay? So it's varied. There are socioeconomic reasons for mental health issues. There are biological reasons, and then there are environmental reasons. So when we talk about the socioeconomic reasons, so early trauma in childhood, okay, some sort of trauma, some sort of child abuse, or even witnessing violence in childhood can predispose someone to mental health issues. All right? Then biologically, you mentioned chemical imbalances or genetic traits that the person may have can predispose them. Family history of mental health issues is a big risk. So if there's a family history of a mental health issue, then your risk is a little bit greater depending on what that mental health issue is. And then finally, we have other things like environment. Somebody who has chronic health condition, diabetes, cancer, and those are more at risk for mental health issues. So it's important to understand, as you said, what causes the mental health problem and being able to determine that this mental health issue is actually what is contributing to this kind of behavior, be it criminal behavior or whatever in the person. But how does the family member, how do you know? It's those same symptoms I talked about. If you have an adolescent, an 18, 17, 15-year-old who was formerly doing well in school, all right, having friends, and then all of a sudden he or she just wants to hole up in their room, not come out. They just go to school and back. Their grades start to slip. All right, they're sleeping too much. They're not eating. Okay, these are things. That's your sign. You get that child to the doctor. 10 years to 19-year-olds, 1 in 7 globally of 10 to 19-year-old has a mental health issue. 1 in 7 of 10 to 19-year-olds. So the reason I'm saying is that parents need to pay attention. Okay, it's not enough for us to be hustling to provide for our children, but we need to be paying attention because, as I said, 50% of all mental health problems manifest by age 25.
Doctor, I heard you. You talked about training for public officials,
Yes.
citizen advocacy. Now, mental health came up as a major issue, as a major public issue in 2020, when we had in October 2020 the NSAS protest. Part of the demands by the people involved in that NSAS movement was that policemen in Nigeria should be subjected to regular psychiatric checks.
Absolutely.
To be sure that, they are in good state, in health and in body.
Yes.
Now, that conversation was stretched to the extent that, in fact, for anybody to hold public office in Nigeria, such persons must undergo psychiatric tests,
yes,
because of Nigerians' surprise at the behavior of public officials. Do you think that mental health checks should be part of the governance process in Nigeria for all these policemen and also for political leaders? Do you recommend it as a regular aspect of public health care?
I recommend it for everyone. Okay, I'm a pediatrician by training. One of the things we do in a regular annual well child checkup is to do testing on the child. And it's a questionnaire that the children, when they get to the age that they're able, and their parents can fill out about some of this. And these questionnaires give you a clue as to the person's mental status. Everybody, not just elected officials. It should be the norm up when you go to have an annual checkup with your physician. For obstetrics and gynecology, one of the things we're supposed to ask women is, have you been feeling depressed? And if they say no, then you give more questions. Have you lost interest? The things that I mentioned. Have you found lately that you're numb? You don't feel anything? You don't care about anything? These are questions. If we're asking these sort of questions at every health checkup for all age groups, And at the point of appointment, we care a lot about whether you did your youth service and you have your youth certificate, right? That should be a testing for any publicly held position. You should undergo psychological testing. And absolutely for police force, any force that can carry arms, military, police, absolutely should have psychological testing.
So in terms of policies, legislature, I know we've talked about the budget and how in itself the amount of money allocated to health is grossly insufficient.
Yeah.
Compare that to recommended percentage by WHO. What are some of the quick wins for Nigeria, especially at government level and then at private sector level as well? Certain policies that can help to drive up awareness of mental health and also contribute significantly to that space. I was having a conversation with you prior and we just look at statistics, for instance. Do we have statistics in Nigeria? You talk about 1 in 7 globally. Do we have can we measure the extent here in Nigeria?
Yeah. It is measurable to the extent that data is kept. Okay? We know that I can't say for Nigeria, but I'm pretty confident about that for Lagos State, that every child who enters the school system is supposed to have some sort of medical checkup before they go into the school system. And then they're supposed to continually have those checkups. That is one way to collect data. Because if we're administering these questionnaires that will help us pick up, does this child have ADHD? Does this child have ADD? Does this child have oppositional defiant behavior? Is this child exhibiting symptoms of anxiety or exhibiting symptoms of depression? If we're gathering that data and we're keeping that data in a proper depository, that is how we develop the statistics. And is that data that will drive you to say, listen, look at the problem. We need a greater allocation in this area. Do you understand? So that's one policy for me. I think just using that catch-all of the public school system, of any school system, public or private, is one way to do it. Then employment, government employment, should have some sort of, so that anybody who's coming to get any kind of role in government, be it the most junior person in the secretariat to the most senior minister, if there's some sort of, that's another way to gather data, okay? Then public health centers, okay? That's another way to gather data. Mothers coming through to have pregnant women, there's ways to do it because data, we're in 2024. Okay, data is powerful because without data, you cannot make any kind of develop any kind of reasonable policies. Without data, you're just closing your eyes and chucking a dart at a board if you do it any other way.
Well, doctor, let me ask you: is there a cure for any of these,
mental health issues
along the spectrum
yes.
that you have defined?
Absolutely. There is what we call talk therapy. There's cognitive behavior modification. There are medications that you can use. And with the talk therapy is either one-on-one with a psychologist or it can be group therapy, So we don't recommend drugs for everything, Some things just being able to sit and talk through with somebody who will teach you coping skills is all you need for mild anxiety, mild depressive, temporary depressive states. Okay, you don't need much more than that, all right? But it's having the resources to be able to do that. So for example, you and I can learn some basic coping skills that'll help us, have good mental health, okay? One of those things, something very simple, stay positive, okay? What that means is when things happen around you, learn to reframe them and look for the positive in it. Okay, one of the things that I do is when I'm going through a really tough time, I tell myself, this is actually good for you because you will be a different person when you emerge from this. You will learn there's good things you can learn. It's reframing it. It's the same situation, but all you're doing is reframing it. So stay positive. Even on your worst days, something good has happened. There's been at least one good thing.
How does society deal with the challenge of drug addiction, particularly among young people? You say within a certain age range, a certain percentage has mental health issues. Well, every day, even in the Koyi around here, we see many of these people, with the dancing to music that does not exist, and you can see that these people are on drugs. So how do we deal with that? Because that's a major threat in this society.
But the problem is that the drug use is a symptom of something else. The drug use is a response to a society that has one of the youngest populations in the world, but with few opportunities. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes. We can't just target the drug use. There's a reason. There's something driving the drug use. What I'm talking about now is what you and I and you can say to our kids. Coping skills all of us can use so we don't lose it when somebody almost hits us in traffic and we jump out and we're ready to fight. Do you understand what I mean? Okay? Staying positive, practicing gratitude. Every day, at the end of my day, I chronicle the good things that I'm grateful for. Even if it's that such and such and I had a nice conversation today. Or you know what? That lady at the market really smiled at me and we have this banter going. There's always something to be grateful for. That's a coping skill in a society like this where everything is there's so many burdensome things, okay? All right? The other thing is building useful connections. Human beings are social beings, okay? So be very judicious about who you have around you and you're connecting with. Is it, watch out for that friend who's all doom and gloom and just bad negativity all the time, and surround yourself with more positivity. All right? If you have a strong faith, make connections with your faith-based community. Volunteer. We have many problems in Nigeria. Pick something and make yourself useful so that you are doing something meaningful. So you're part of a solution and not creating more of a problem. Do you understand what I mean? One of the things and I'm just speaking for myself, I'm passionate, something like this that I'm doing is something I'm passionate about. I'm also passionate about hunger. So when I'm in the States, I'm a part of the Community Food Bank of New Jersey. I volunteer there every month, packing boxes, making food for people who don't, you do something so that you are a part of the solution. Do you understand? And then do not avoid using drugs and alcohol to medicate yourself, because that's what it is. It's a self-medication. So when you find that you're needing crutches to support you more and more because you're getting more and more overwhelmed, find somebody to talk to. So do you understand what I mean? So these are just some being open about our feelings, especially for men too. Where we're, men are kind of touchy, you got to be tough, you've got, being aware, in touch with your feelings and how you're reacting to things and handling those appropriately. These are all coping skills that everybody can learn, and we can teach our kids and teach the young people around us.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today. Just before we go, if you had 3 wish lists, because, decision makers are listening,
yes.
especially in the mental health space and as an advocate in Nigeria, what would be top of your list in terms of improving this sector?
Okay. People with mental health issues are not crazy. They are people with a health disorder. Everybody needs to understand that. No different from asthma or diabetes or stroke or anything. 1. 2, let us begin to put in place systems in our primary care health that address these issues so that we are able to pick up on those issues early diagnosis, and then lastly, let's invest. Countries like the UK, like the US, what do they do when they don't have enough staffing with something? They go outside of the country and they bring people in. When they have nursing shortages, they go to the Philippines and make it easier for for them to come and work in the US. They've done the same thing for medicine, which is why we have the brain drain, right? Okay, so find a way to hire, to bring, to entice mental health practitioners into our system, because it is vitally needed.
And our leaders too should learn to arm themselves with positivity, which you said it's one way of coping. But there were some helplines the producers were putting on the screen there. Yeah. Are those helplines working?
I hope so. That's what I found that was available. I didn't call every single one, but those are the helplines these are all Lagos State helplines.
All right. I know Lagos State has done a lot in that area.
These are all Lagos State helplines, and a lot of the other states should
emulate. They do work. So people can call, and I think it's quite important to have it handy, even if it's not just for yourself, but for anyone around you who might need to refer.
Exactly.
Lagos State has done, child domestic violence, violation of girls, they've done quite good
These
work.
are all Lagos State numbers, yes.
All right, thank you so very much, Dr. Toju Chike-Obi, for speaking with us this morning, raising awareness and advocating for better attention paid to mental health wellness in Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.